Hey Math Aces, and welcome to Mr. Ace Math. In this lesson, we're going to go over everything you'll need to know about adding fractions and mixed numbers. And let's start with the lesson breakdown.
And you'll find this lesson breakdown with timestamps in the description below. Feel free to use those timestamps to go to any part of the video that you think you need the most.
First, we'll go over the 3 steps that are needed in order to add fractions and mixed numbers. After that, we're going to go over 3 examples. The first example is a model, so it's a little bit longer than the others, but it goes over exactly how this works. After that, we'll go over examples 2 and 3. These are the best places to start if you want to just learn how to do this mathematically. After these 3 examples, we'll have the pause and practice, where you'll have the chance to try some questions of your own. After that, the answers will be revealed, and finally, we'll have the reflection, where we go over everything we've learned from this lesson. But in order to do well with this lesson, you'll need to know the following skills. First, you'll need to make sure you know about fractions. Mainly that the top is the numerator and the bottom is the denominator. Then, you'll have to make sure you know how to convert from improper fractions to mixed numbers. This will be really important if you end up with a value that is an improper fraction. And number 3, you'll have to make sure you know how to add unlike fractions. So make sure you know those, and let's get started. So let's go over the 3 steps we'll need to successfully do this lesson. Step number 1. We need to separate the whole numbers and the fractions in our problem. Step number 2. We'll need to add the fractions first and carry if needed. And step number 3, we'll need to add our whole numbers that are left over. This may sound like a lot, so let's apply it to our first example, which is the model. So let's say we have 2½ plus 3/4. Before we even go over the step, I want to show you what that looks like. So up here we have 2 and 1/2, and down here we have 3/4. This is cut up into 4 pieces, but only 3 of them are here, and that's our 3/4. So now we'll go to step 1, which is to separate the whole numbers and the fractions. So what I'm going to do is take all of my whole values and put them on the left side, and take all my fractions and put them on the right. This was 2½ Now it's still 2½, but I've separated the whole numbers from the fractions, because that's really important for step number 2. Which is to add our fractions and then carry if we need to. So in order to add fractions, we need to make sure we have the same denominator, which means we need to have the LCD. In this case, that is 4. Then we need to make equivalent fractions using our LCDs. So 2 times what is 4? That's 2 times 2. And since we multiply the bottom of the fraction by 2, we do the same thing to the top. So we'll have 1 times 2, and that equals 2. So now we have our equivalent fraction, which is 2/4. And look what happens to our model. Instead of having it out of 2 pieces, where we only have 1, now we make it out of 4 pieces, because 4 would make the 1 whole here, and we have 2. 2 out of 4. So now let's go to our bottom fraction. 4 times what equals 4? Well, that's 4 times 1. And whatever we do to the bottom of the fraction, we need to do to the top. So here we'll have 3 times 1. And what does that give us? Well, that's going to be 3. So now we've got 2/4 and 3/4. When we add them together, we get 5/4. And if you think about it, it makes sense because each of these pieces is 1/4. And here we have 5 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But the issue is that we're not allowed to leave our answer improper like this, which means we're going to have to write it with a whole number and a fraction. Well, we can take these pieces and make one whole by doing this. So now we have one whole, which means we can write a big number, 1. And left over we have 1/4. So we'll write that here. So we now know that 5/4 is the same exact thing as 1 and 1/4. But we don't need the improper fraction form, so let's get rid of that. Remember how it said in the step to carry if you need to? This is the fraction side, so only fractions should be here. So we'll take this 1 whole and bring it over to the whole number side. And then we can go to step 3, which is to add our whole numbers, which is pretty straightforward. We've got 2 plus 1, and that gives us 3. So we added our fractions, we added our whole numbers, and that gives us our final answer, which is 3 and 1/4. Now that we're done with the model, let's take a look at our next example where we just answer this mathematically. Here we've got 4 2/3 plus 1/5. Remember, we still have to follow our 3 steps. And step 1 was to separate the whole numbers and the fractions, so we can draw a line going right between them. Next, we'll go to step 2, which is to add our fractions first and carry if needed. And here we're going to have to know how to add unlike fractions. And this means we'll need to find the LCD for 2/3 and 1/5. The LCD of these fractions is 15. Let's look at our first fraction, 2/3. 3 times what is 15? Well, that's 3 times 5. And to make an equivalent fraction, whatever we do to the bottom, we need to do to the top. So now we'll do 2 times 5. And that gives us 10. So our equivalent fraction is 10/15. Now let's look at the bottom fraction. 5 times what equals 15? Well, that's 5 times 3. And to make an equivalent fraction, whatever we do to the bottom, we have to do to the top. So now we'll do 1 times 3. And that gives us 3. And that means our equivalent fraction to 1/5 is 3/15. Now that the denominators are the same, we can add them. So we've got 10/15 plus 3/15. 10 plus 3 is 13. And since our denominator is 15, that stays the same, which means our answer here will be 13/15. This isn't improper, so there's nothing to carry. And that means we can go to step number 3, which is to add the whole numbers. We're pretty lucky because there's nothing else to add here to 4. So 4 plus nothing is 4. And since we added our fractions and added our whole numbers, we're done, making our final answer 4 13/15. And here's our last example. Here, we've got 8 and 5/8 plus 5/6. First, we'll separate the whole numbers and the fractions. So we'll draw a line separating our whole numbers and fractions. Next, we'll add our fractions and carry if needed. That's really only going to happen if you end up with an improper fraction. So let's see if that happens. So looking at these fractions, we're going to need to find the LCD. Our denominator here is 8 and our denominator here is 6. So what's the least common multiple for 8 and 6? Well, that's 24. And now let's look at our top fraction. We need to create an equivalent fraction out of 24. To do that, we're going to need to multiply the top the same way we multiplied the bottom. What did we multiply 8 by to get 24? Well, that would be 3. And since we multiplied the bottom by 3, we're going to have to do the same thing to the top. So we'll do 5 times 3. And that gives us 15. So 15 over 24 is our equivalent fraction for 5 over 8. Now let's look at the bottom fraction. 5 over 6. 6 times what is 24? Well, that's times 4. And since we multiplied the denominator by 4, we'll have to do the same thing to the top. So we'll do 5 times 4, and that equals 20. Now that our denominators are the same, we can add our numerators. 15 plus 20 is 35, which makes this answer 35 over 24, because the denominator just stays the same. But we have a problem here. This is improper. So to turn this into a mixed number, we've got to see how many times 24 can go into 35. That would be 1 time with a remainder of 11, and that means that this will be 1 and 11 over 24. But this side is only supposed to be for fractions, and the problem is now we have a whole number here. So we need to carry that 1 and place it on the whole number side. So now we can go to step 3, which is to add whole numbers. Our whole numbers here are 8 and 1. And 8 plus 1 equals 9. So we added our fractions, we added our whole numbers, which means that we're done, making our final answer 9 and 11 over 24. So here's your pause and practice. Just pause and practice. Hit the pause button and try these 6 questions. Once you're done, hit the play button to see if your answers are correct. Ready, set, go. So let's take a look at our answers. Number 1 is 6 and 1/8. Number 2 is 9 and 1/10. Number 3 is 3 and 31 over 63. Number 4 is 7 and 11 over 15. Number 5 is 4 and 1/6. And number 6 is 5 and 7 over 22. So how'd you do, Math Aces? If you got everything right, I want you to write Pause and Practice Pro in the comments. And don't forget to share this lesson with a friend. So what did we learn from this lesson? How many steps are there when adding mixed numbers and fractions? There are 3 steps. The 3 steps are: number 1, separate the whole numbers and the fractions. Number 2, add the fractions and carry if you need to. And remember, you'll know if you need to if you end up with an improper fraction. You turn it into a mixed number and then the whole number gets carried. And number 3, add the whole numbers. Well, there you have it, Math Aces, everything you'll need to know about how to add mixed numbers and fractions. I hope this lesson was helpful. If you have any questions at all, put them in the comments. I would love to help. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in math class.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Questions? Comments? Leave them down below.
And thanks for using Mr. Ace Math. Don't just pass math, ace it.